Hi, today I am presenting a just released book that deals with the history of the Steckling family, but also with the state of the UFO field and the topic of UFOs and extraterrestrial life in general. The book is The UFO Reality: Can Truth Prevail? It is written by Steckling of the Adamski Foundation. It is a profusely illustrated book with a lot of interesting documents and photos. I helped with the editorial setup of the book, so I do have an intimate knowledge of its content. I would say it is a must-buy for everyone seriously interested in the topic of UFOs and extraterrestrials. With me today is Steckling to discuss the book and also the general state of the UFO field. We have a lot to talk about. Welcome, Glenn. Welcome, Glenn. So you have written a book about your family's history and also your opinions about the ET field and the UFO field in general. So let's begin by you doing a little bit of maybe a sum up of your book, what it's about, and what people can expect of the book.
Certainly. The book is here, right here. It's called The UFO Reality: Can Truth Prevail? It took several years to compose it and write it, and it had not been for Renee's help, I'd still be working on it because he helped me with the editing and approaching of the publisher, and so we worked in order to make sure that the book didn't get slid underneath the carpet and that it got out and brought out the word. I would say that more than anything, it has nothing to do with my opinions. There's an old classical saying about opinions that we can't repeat on the air.
Yeah.
But the idea here is that opinions mean nothing. It's what you know that means something.
Yeah.
And I find in this UFO field, there is an extreme low quantity of people that actually have true information and aren't susceptible to either other people in this field who are busy marketing and promoting themselves, the science fiction industry, the science fiction media, and so on and so forth. So I wrote this book with the word truth in it for a reason. And I wrote about experiences that we had as a family over the many half a century duration of involvement in this field, both as co-workers and personal friends of George Adamski, and also being introduced to his space contacts and friends, and being also alongside during some of those events. And so consequently, I thought it was necessary to bring out a lot of information that is just otherwise overlooked. Today, the UFO field, the people want to not only rewrite UFO history, they want to reinvent it, and they want to negate as much of it as possible that doesn't prescribe to their particular promotional aspirations at this moment.
Yeah.
And so I find that a deplorable state of affairs, and I stepped on a lot of toes writing this book, which I knew I was going to, but I've been doing this a long time and I don't mind stepping on toes. And so I thought it was important that not only does the newer generation get some factual information and very qualitative photographs of UFOs, because, you know, you look in the news, NASA in the last couple of weeks said, oh, this doesn't exist. And then the Pentagon is denying as well. We're back basically to the same place we were in the late 50s and early 1960s, where everything is whitewashed, covered up, negated, and pushed away because they're hoping for another generational cycle or two, 25 or 50 years, to which they can extend the same propaganda program that they have been running for a long time. So I am proud to make the book available. It is embedded with an incredible amount of information and photographs. Some of them we will look here on the share screen as well as we go through this program this evening. And I think that once you look at that, and they're just not George Adamski pictures, they're pictures from all over the world, many different circumstances, and it's no longer even conceptual that somebody can say, well, UFOs don't exist, and I won't use the word UAP. That won't be the only time you'll hear me use it, because I think that word is also part of the rebranding of the information, because people have come over several generations to understand UFOs and equate them with extraterrestrial spacecraft. And so now somebody has cleverly decided, well, if we can change the term a little bit, most people will then not associate it to the other one, and then we can move on and reprogram and redefine the subject all over again and poison the water, so to speak. And so this, to me, is a clandestine, one of the many clandestine programs and agendas that are being perpetrated within the UFO field.
Yeah, that was well said, Glenn. I think it's spot on with many of your observations. We may touch upon some of the things that you mentioned, but let me begin with the first part of that book, which is extremely interesting for a lot of people, I'm sure, that your family history and your connections with Adamski and the extraterrestrials, or the space people, as Adamski called them. Let's begin with it could be that you are not going to be able to say much. I don't want to. That's fine. But in the book, you described that your family moved to Mexico in the late 60s. What was the purpose of that move because you were there almost 3 years, as far as I understand.
That's correct.
If you can elaborate on that.
Certainly. Well, first of all, I want to elaborate on the fact that my parents were given invitations to organizations such as before 22 scientists, a panel at NASA, again, our Space Flight Center in 1966. Then thereafter, 3 months thereafter, Colonel Freeman at the Pentagon invited them again. So these aren't places where you go bang on the door and scratch and howl and say, let me in. They make their determination on what they want to see and whether there's any validity to it. And I can guarantee you, when you look at what's floating around in the UFO circles today, these people don't even get through the chain link fence anymore, because it is so ridiculous. It's like Halloween. Yeah. Every day it's like Halloween perpetrated upon the minds, upon people, so that they no longer can think straight. So there was NASA, there was the Pentagon, there was Voice of America, there was television like Art Linkletter, Lord Clancarty, the British Select Committee of the British House of Lords, who was also one of the sponsors for George Adamski in 1959 in his visit to UK. There was Lord Mountbatten, who is the uncle of the late Prince Philip. And then there was Lord Downton.
Not the late Prince Philip, he's still king.
Pardon me.
He has just become king.
No, wait a minute. No, wait a minute. Philip not. Charles is king, not Philip.
Sorry, Charles, but he was a Philip, sorry.
So he was the uncle of the late Prince Philip, who had a lot of interest in this subject. Lord Mountbatten had one of these craft touch down on his property and witnessed in Ireland.
Yeah.
And also Lord Downton went on the record. He was Lord Air Marshal for all the air armed services for the United Kingdom during the Battle of Britain and everything. Sir Desmond Leslie, of course, who is part of a co-author with George in the first book, Flying Saucers Have Landed, part of the Leslie estate in Ireland. And I just had an email with his daughter, Antonia. We were discussing some things with the book. And all these people, these are heavy hitters. These aren't just people who are clowns. These are all people who have access to areas of government and military and files and information that is very astute and very accurate. And these are the kind of people that supported George Adamski. And that is something that just irks the skeptics who try to vehemently twist that story as much as they possibly can. So we worked with George, and before George passed away, he said to us, there's an area down in Mexico where there is a space base. Now, whether it's temporary or permanent, I don't think anything is permanent. I think things move around. But at that point, there was a base there. So we went down in 1968 to scope around the area around that particular geographic location. And in the book, and I have also some of the pictures as well, we bought a ranch that is very close to the mountain, about 3,000 feet in elevation, and we ran an agricultural ranch with cattle and pears and avocados and everything you could think of agriculturally, because to live off the land like a farmer is very difficult. There's a lot of work to do, sunrise to sunset, to survive. But more importantly, we wanted to be close to that space base. And upon occasion, we had interaction with some of the people who were transporting themselves, or transitioning is a better word, through the space base into the local society, and then going off to whatever assignments and endeavors they have. And so it was a very interesting and very dynamic time. And then due to a multitude of reasons, in 72, we came back to administer the foundation with the late Alice Wells, who had been a partial inheritor of some of the Adamski materials, and she then transferred her ownership to us, and we continued the foundation ever since 1972. Yeah. And and in Mexico, we had visits from the officials, and I describe it in the book. About 2 weeks after our arrival, 2 big truckloads of troops and military secret police show up, and the commandant comes, knocks on our door in the living room, and Dad says, "Come on in, you're welcome here." He knew officials, he knew how they thought, he knew the government very well. These were all things that were very familiar to him. And he knew that you catch more bees with honey than you do vinegar, so you don't insult these people. We have we have made an industry now in this UFO field of constantly pushing conspiracy, constantly blame game, constantly the mysticism and psychism. And we do that on purpose, because that's how we can continue to roll the ball. Because if you provide answers, then you put something to rest. You've got an answer to it. Yeah. You know it. Yeah. This way, answers are never given. And so therefore, it just keeps becoming this whirlpool. It's like a cesspool. So the commandant came in, and in the meantime, the truck drove around the ranch and deposited the troops, and they went in there with their metal detectors and magnetic rods and looked everywhere and poked it in the ground. And my father looked out the window. We were all sitting in the living room, and he says, this makes me very happy, because obviously you wouldn't come here and waste your time looking for something if you truly thought there was nothing to look for. Yeah. And then he said to him, he said, "Don't worry, I don't have a spaceship hiding, because if I had one, I'd have gotten in and gotten the heck out of here a long time ago." So the commandant looked at the pictures from George, the mothership and the scout craft, the famous ones that we'll see later. And he said, "Well, we received an abbreviated dossier on you from the Pentagon. And so we know what you're all about and what you stand for and what you represent." And he says, "I can tell you this. We know the space people are here. We know where they come from. We know that they're good for us." And I explain in the book several chapters where they have helped the society in Mexico on many things. And lastly, we don't want them. My father was perplexed. He says, he looked at the guy and says, well, it doesn't make a great deal of sense. If something has that much benefit to you, why is it that you're so willing to turn it away? And he says, because this changes the entire structure of our society, economically, religiously, and the tier system, as far as differences between people, the caste system, like we have in many nations on this world.
Yeah.
And we don't want any of that. So he said, you're allowed to stay here as long as you do not go out amongst the people and start teaching them about this subject. So since we were there for other reasons anyhow, and since there was a very prominent co-worker of George Adamski, her name was Maria Cristina Rueda, married into a very wealthy governing family in Mexico City. Already years before that, in the late 50s, she was responsible for taking George's materials and having them translated and published in Mexico and distributed there, because they couldn't do anything to her or the family, especially being natural born and being as connected as they are. Her husband wasn't very fond of the idea, but she was a very, I wouldn't say stubborn, but she was a very driven person, and she was going to do what she thought was right. So that's basically a little bit about Mexico while we were there.
How was it? How were you able to acquire that piece of land in Mexico? Is that just? Don't you have to go through some kind of process?
Well, yeah, you have to go through a certain process. You have a process upon which you can acquire the land. We had an attorney friend of ours who was with us for many, many decades, Norman Stone, and he passed away probably about 7 years, 6, 7 years ago.
Okay.
And he also had met George. He was with us in Washington too, and so he had filed for residency in Mexico already then.
Yeah, yeah.
And so then, as that paperwork went through, and since he was familiar with the legal framework, and of course, in these countries, money talks. So when you change hands, money suddenly, applications go through much quicker, get stamped much faster, and all of a sudden, which didn't seem was possible before was instantaneously possible.
Yeah.
And then later on, my sister was born in Mexico, and then she, in her name, being a natural citizen, had the legal rights to the property as well.
Okay. Let me just a little bit touch about, I can remember in Denmark that H.C. Petersen, Hans Petersen, talked about a Mexico project. Had that anything to do with your family's stay in Mexico, about something about a cosmic school and so on in Mexico?
Yes.
It was. So it was part of that. Yeah.
What happened is that in the late 50s, in 58, George was going to 58, 59. He was going to uproot and go down to the Guadalajara area. Outside Guadalajara is a lake called Lake Chapala. It's a very pretty area. It's sort of like a Lake Tahoe environment, but not as cold. It is a more subtropic.
Yeah.
And he rented an old a villa from one of the embassies, and he liked it down there, and he wanted to go down there. And he also had attended several meetings at Space Base down there as well. And so it was George who gave us the information and location and the intent of, when things were going, shall we say, not so well in the U.S. We had the opposing forces had killed Kennedy, both of them, and including Dr. King, and the entire country was going upside down into a war and military industrialized economy, and the U.S. became the greatest subverter of the UFO information worldwide. And in fact, it would use its influence as far as funding and appropriations to other countries to tell them to keep quiet. Otherwise, you're not going to get your money. And so we started to dictate throughout the world, not only our own political beliefs and mantras, but also many other things. And so this has nothing to do with democracy and freedom and the republic and all the things that we tout to the poor children in school. These are just brainwashing methods in order to keep people calm and placated in order to accept what's given to them. We want a society where we can tell them what to do and what to think and not to question. And so that's why we went down there to Mexico and interacted with the same space people that we had known with George in D.C. beforehand, and had interacted with them afterwards when we came back here to the U.S. And then when things became much more accelerated, my father started to acquire the microfiche and film from the NASA and lunar orbiter projects in Apollo, so that we could start looking for the information that was subsequent on the moon that we have on Earth: atmosphere, water, atmospheric pressure, clouds, mist, moving objects. All of these things have been categorized by NASA, not only in the 60s, but over the period of decades thereafter as well. And so we started that research in order to come up with my father's second book. His first book was called Why Are They Here? Spaceships from Other Worlds. That was printed and released by Vantage Press in 1969. And then We Discovered Alien Bases on the Moon came out in 1981. There were three authors at that time. George Leonard in 1979, Somebody Else is on the Moon. My father's book in 81. And then William Bryant's the third, a book called Moongate that came out in 83. And we were pretty much the cutting edge of the lunar anomaly investigation and have maintained it for a number of decades since.
Yeah, Glenn, thanks. As you know, Adamski was a special character and had a special purpose while he was here. Can you share anything not particularly well known about his purpose while he lived here?
Well, yes, it's a true statement that he was a very unique individual, and this uniqueness led him to this subject of exobiology, extraterrestrial life, and more importantly, the universality of principles of life, which are determined everywhere. For instance, we know that from outer space, it is the womb of creation, that there RNA and DNA, and the only difference between RNA and DNA is a strand. But this genetic material, this organic material of the elements and molecules only come together in certain specific ways. Nature is not chaotic or arbitrary. It is very defined and very specific, whether you are here on the other side of the cosmos or Alpha Centauri or Tau Ceti or any other place you want to mention. The principle of life remains the same. And this statement gives no end of grievance to the people in the UFO field, because they want you to believe that anytime you step away from this planet, now you have fairy tale monsters, whether it's Enochs or Ewoks or shapeshifters or crayfish and praying mantis, Sasquatch. They come up with every possible thing that they can out of their imagines. And it's often nothing more than replicated after science fiction publications or movie productions. I can't remember, but a few weeks after the movie Avatar came out, all of a sudden people were making claims that they were in contact with blue aliens and long tails and webbed hands and feet swimming around in the water. I mean, so you have this an incredible, irresponsible promotion going on, and whatever is thrown out there people grasp onto, and then all of a sudden you see that replicated over and over again, and no one holds their feet to the fire. Nobody says to these people, well, show us some proof. And the first thing you'll say is, well, I can't show you the shapeshifter because he was a tree now, but he's actually the rabbit, or maybe he turned into the wheelbarrow. It comes to the same hop, skip, and play around that is used always to defer and to remix the situation. I just watched a program with one of the UFO personalities, and the interviewer asked, "Well, you know, the materials in space are exobiology, chemistry, and that's going to be the same no matter where you go." And you could see from the other person's look on their face that this wasn't going to mesh with their particular brand of what they're promoting, because they want to tell you, oh well, you know, there's so many Nordics, and you know, 9 groups of Nordics, and 3 of them are good and 6 are bad, and then you got tall whites, you got all of this. This is all nonsense. And these people should be held accountable. What I can't figure out is how they can look themselves in the mirror and say, you know, because they know they're purposely misleading people. If they're not, then they're delusional, and they must be taking some good stuff they're growing in the backyard. And so consequently, it doesn't leave a lot of room for, you know, to call that on the carpet. And I think that it's now the time to call it on the carpet, and that's the reason I wrote this book, and that's the reason I'm stepping on the toes that I am, because enough is enough. We can't move forward in this field. Disclosure is an illusion. It's a roll of the dice in Las Vegas, because you never get any definitive answers, and it's designed that way on purpose. Because if you get definitive answers, then you can put that to the side and proceed to the next thing, and sooner or later, like a book, you keep peeling away the pages and you expose the truth as you go consistently through it. And that's exactly what the UFO community does not want you to do.
Yeah, but that has to be only for economical reasons and to defraud the subject, isn't it? Really?
Well, I think it's a combination. First of all, it's economical. I think next it's got to be self-promotion, because there's a lot of people that eat up being on the air or being in front of a camera or being recognized or being, you know, given accolades and things like that. And if you were a true ufologist, none of these things would mean anything to you, because the information and the exposure and the education of this subject is everything. The person who brings it, he's just a messenger. That's nothing. But going back to George was selected because he was very open to these concepts. Already in the 30s and earlier, he had been exposed to different parts of the world and different educational systems based upon a non-traditional standard that we have in this country and in many other countries. And so his exposure had to do more along the principles of life, the mastery of elements, the understanding of the composition of manifestation. And so as the years went by and he became more and more attuned to this, he had a school in 1936 in Laguna Beach, California. He got his first telescope in 38. In 1940, he went to Valley Center, not far here from Vista. And then in 45, his friend, the astronomer and doctor from Caltech, Joseph Johnson, suggested he move to the base of Mount Palomar, because 2 years later, the Mount Palomar 200-inch Hale Observatory was being put in. And those scientists and George sat down and talked about this subject all the time. And when we get to the point where we want to share screen, I'll show you some pictures that were taken by the astronomers in 1949, and you tell me that they don't believe that anything doesn't exist? Yeah, come on.
If you want to share now, you can share screen if you
Okay,
would like
let's
to.
see here. Let's go share screen. Share. So, first of all, I'll share the copy of the cover of the book.
Yes.
And I was very happy with the artwork on this. This artwork was done for us by one of our Adamski Foundation members in Japan.
Can you maximize that screen, Glenn? Just click on that one.
Decades ago.
Yep.
And his name was Ikeda. And this isn't by far the only artistic work he did. We did also have it as well in one of our other books called Behind the Flying Saucer Mystery 2, when we redid the book, one of George's books, and you can see that he also had a cutaway of the flying saucer as well. That's also his artwork as well. So, so let's see what we can do here. This is a picture of the school in 1936 there in Laguna Beach. And it shows you how hypocritical people are. His distractors, his debunkers tried to say, well, you know, George once made a statement that, you know, if it hadn't been for a prohibition, he'd never gotten to the UFO business. But they had forgotten that prohibition had ended in 1933 under the administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Yeah, that's correct.
And so alcohol was free to buy. There was no profit in it in the middle 30s. So they kind of messed up their own ignorance as well. And then they tried to say, well, he grew wine on the vineyards on the property so he could sell wine. You yourself can look here and see at the chaparral landscape, cactus, all of this. There's no wine growing there. The only wine that's growing is in people's brains.
Yeah.
Here's a picture from the Los Angeles Times in April of 1938, when he was gifted the 6-inch telescope, which in those days was quite a accomplishment, quite a little piece of equipment. It was given to him by Lolita Johnson, who was the mother of Dr. Joseph Johnson, the Caltech astronomer, who was George's friend and who was also responsible for the sky mapping and the geophysical placement for the 200-inch telescope when it went up in 1947. So here's, you know, an old picture of them working the fields in 1940s up till 1945 in Valley Center, where he was also an air warden, which you know, meant when planes flew by, you took your binoculars out and you took a look at it, and then you made a call and you know, reported to the local military authorities what kind of airplanes you could see flying around.
Yeah.
So the next one, this picture was also taken in Valley Center as well. I thought it was just a nice youthful shot of him, of George, and his demeanor and nature and association to the natural world. And I think that, like the old saying goes, if the animals like you, you don't have to worry about people.
Exactly.
And so this is Dr. Joseph Johnson.
Was he an employee of the observatory, or was he part of the building of the observatory?
Caltech.
He was Caltech. Okay.
Yeah, Caltech. Yeah. Caltech is the owner and operator of all the 3 or 4 observatories up there on top of the mountain.
Okay.
And so, so he was responsible for that. And he would he would bring people down, and they would stop at George's place in the evening and have talks. Alice Welch ran a small little coffee shop there, cafe, and they always tried to demean George by saying, "Oh, he was a hot dog cook or a hamburger cook or whatever."
Yeah.
And I always find that so unbelievable ridiculous. I mean, I've flown airplanes for 45 years of my life, 35 professionally. And if I go out in my backyard on a weekend, decide to fire up the barbecue and cook something to eat for my friends, am I now a lousy pilot and instead I'm a hamburger cook?
Yeah,
I mean,
you're a hamburger stand owner.
yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, the mentality of these people, but what's worse is the mentality of the people who are willing to accept it.
Yeah.
What's coming up now is the Project Blue book report taken, and the pictures that are coming up thereafter. This happened in October of 1949 over a period of 1 week. And you can see here, flying discs observed near the observatory, and a recording Geiger counter was also activated.
Yeah.
And also, here's a report that George Adamski made also that was both with the 15 and the 5-inch telescope, which was a 6 actually.
Yeah.
And that was also in Project Blue Book as well. And here comes the first set of pictures. And then you can see the immense structure of the 200-inch telescope and these craft flying in formation. Mind you, these were taken and there were multiple formations over a period of 7 days. And the astronomers told George that when the sliding door was open so that they could point the telescope out, a mothership, a large cigar-shaped craft, would park itself within the optical view of the main lens so that they could see it. And so when the astronomers decided to take it, since it sits on a 360-degree swivel, and move it somewhere else, the craft would also move with it. So it always was parked in front of the ocular. And so they knew it. And then, of course, you can see here closer shot of these craft, definitely bell-shaped and saucer-shaped. And also this one here, which is a magnificent shot as well. I mean, anybody who looks at these pictures and says that these things don't exist, or these are seagulls or atmospheric disturbances, I mean, it's almost too ludicrous.
Yeah.
And next to the observatory is this platform, a 200-inch cement platform that mimes the size and the dimension of the main mirror itself. And it sits right to the west side of the main observatory. If you were looking at the main observatory, it would be over here to the left.
Yep.
But here you go is the most interesting. This picture also, since we had mentioned George Adamski reporting to Project Blue Book, the large cigar-shaped craft over the Mount Palomar area, and more importantly, look at all these little crafts that have come out of the main craft as well. There got to be at least a dozen of them as well. And so, I mean, there's nobody who has this kind of material or has this authenticity. This picture we took here just about 2 months ago, right in around the same area along the main ridge line of Mount Palomar, down to the same view area of which that large cigar-shaped craft was hovering.
How close was that to the observatory itself? That shot?
The observatory is the next ridge over.
Okay.
So the first ridge runs along the entire front line of the mountain. And then there's a slight dip down into a valley and then up the next ridge. And on the secondary ridge is of the observatory.
Okay.
And this picture was taken by my father out of the window of the Boeing 707 coming back from Europe over the North Atlantic. This is a frame of a motion picture footage, and it shows one of the same type of craft exactly along with the smaller craft next to it. So not only did George take it, but we took it, and other people around the world have taken similar things.
Yeah.
This is also a single frame of a motion picture footage of a large fleet of these craft over Germany in 1966, traveling from Mannheim to Frankfurt. And we were all standing in the train, dozens of people along the side, inside the train, holding the windows down as he was filming this. And this appeared in German national television. This is the thing the Pentagon was very, very interested in.
Yeah.
What I am looking for is quickly here, if I can find it. As I mentioned earlier, with the cement platform for the 200-inch mirror and telescope, I found this that was given to me by a reporter who was doing a article on George Adamski. And my God, this was a long time ago. It's got to be 25, 30 years ago. And the newspaper kiboshed or basically killed the story. But the interesting thing came from the Palomar historian that said when the big mirror for the Palomar telescope was brought up in 1947, it was set on a concrete platform that still sits by the observatory today on the west side. Astronomer Olin Wilson placed a carefully lettered sign on the platform that read, "This flying saucer, drawn here by the light-gathering power of the 200-inch telescope, has brought visitors from other worlds who are currently guests of the government." And the sign was removed after the tourists complained about it.
You can ask yourself, why did the tourists complain about it? What was their grief? What was their grief?
Because what their grief was the fact that you never know. I mean, you have people that are of religious persuasion or all kinds of different mindsets and what have you. And maybe eventually the sign became too visible, and then the authorities got behind it as well. We'll never know the backstory to that.
No.
But this is part of the history that's up there. And when you combine that with the pictures that were released for Project Blue Book, those pictures were not shown in the United States of America, by the way. Those were shown in Europe, not in this country. I have never seen them to this day.
But remember, Glenn, that these photos were only shown last year.
Yes,
in a documentary, so they have really been hidden away safely, haven't they?
Can you imagine? This is just 3 of what they've taken and collected for Project Blue Book, and they have thousands, if not tens of thousands, of actual photos. Yeah. So consequently, once again
But the pictures were also taken outside the observatory. That means that people were prepared for that, or had time enough to go outside and take the photographs.
Well, right? I think not only that, it's under those environmental conditions, this was an area where people were more inclined, especially the staff, was more inclined to have photographic equipment.
Yeah.
Right? And so, unlike the regular society, the cameras of the old days were thick and bulky and heavy, but now everybody's got high quality, high definition phone cameras and things like that. So they obviously were prepared to take pictures of whatever they were going to take pictures of, and they got this in the group.
Yeah, 3. Yeah, the next question, Glenn, could be some of your family's experiences. Did your family ever sit down and talk about specific matters with the space people that you were contacted, or that also Adamski were contacted by? Here I think about special plans for spreading the information, or any concrete plans ahead which were agreed, or specific instructions, or was it left up to your father to find the way without much guidance?
No, the guidance was continuous, and so it was for George as well. There was no place that George went, no place that George traveled, no place that George spoke that was not accompanied in one way or another by his extraterrestrial friends. They either went with him, met him there, or what have you. And these same people were the ones that talked to my parents and were responsible for my father's first book, Why Are They Here? And in fact, when you read that book, he describes openly these space people coming to his place of employment at night, sitting in his office and helping him to compose pieces to the book or clarification of certain things. So they were integratedly involved in helping to produce the correct information in such a way that it would be beneficial. So I can say that they were no strangers to us. That's probably. I remember my mother. She gave a little talk in '95 at the Friends of Adamski conference, which was across the river from Washington in Crystal City near the Pentagon, and they were Mr. and Mrs. Rochester. Madeline wrote for Hans Peterson and his first wife, my mom, myself, and Bill Clendennin, and some other people. And they asked my mom, you can see it on YouTube. In fact, it may even be on my YouTube channel in there. If not, it's going to be. They asked her about meeting the space people, and she had to grin a little bit. She said, I cannot even begin to tell you how many times we interacted with them because you wouldn't believe it. And so they were there continuously.
So they were an integral part of your family's life, actually.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And since the country was on the downhill slide in the last part of the 60s, there was such a work and push to try to help reverse that. So they were working overtime with us with them, until it became apparent that it was time to transfer some of our energies towards a different focus and goals.
Yeah. I can understand that, definitely. But yeah, I expected your answer something like that. Let's see. Your family was exposed to a great deal, and the ETs were almost always present in the background, which is what I understood. Could you have done as much as you did without their continued support?
No, impossible.
It was impossible.
It was impossible. They helped. Make certain plans viable. They warned us when there was impending problems coming. There was once when we were in Europe lecturing, and there was supposed to be a lecture in Vienna, and we had just come out of a lecture in Linz in Austria, and that was the circumstance where Billy Meyer tried to make a havoc of my father's lecture and tried to gain attention for himself, and we just brushed it off because, let's face it, that's all that he's worth, to brush that off.
Yeah.
But the idea is that they came and they told my parents, they said, do not go to the hotel in Vienna. This is not a safe situation. And so my father, he was not one to say, oh, why and how come and tell me more. He went right away and said, okay, boom, there we go. We went, and we ended up staying at the hotel at the train station. And then afterwards, other people came and said, well, we came looking for you, but we couldn't find you. And so my father was very wise, and my mother, when it came to this, and they made sure that when they made plans, they did not do that on open telephone lines, that things were kept as last minute as possible. So to give the least amount of available opportunity to those who would disrupt and try to destroy the message and what was going on. And so they were constantly chasing us all over the place because we changed plans and days and everything, and in 2 weeks, boom, then we were back out and back home. And so it was frustrating for them, and we laughed a little bit about it, but today's an entirely different situation.
Yeah, that would have been much more difficult today, I can tell you. You really need to think about it if you're involved in this, what you're doing every day, even when you go out the door. So let's change the subject just a little bit, but because you have a lot of interesting chapters in your book. I think you actually deal with this quite in detail. Why was the subject of UFOs taken much more seriously in the 40s to 60s compared to now? Because it is a different time now.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
But the reason is very candid and very clear. We did not have the technology. We did not have the computers, the Photoshop, the programs, all the ability to fake everything that we do today. I mean, right now, uh, anybody, a picture of you doing a crime in another country can be faked and photoshopped, and they'll believe that that is criminal evidence and you were responsible for it.
Yeah.
But in those times, that didn't exist. So the pictures were taken were of much greater value, much greater authenticity. They were of volume all over the world. I mean, you think about it. You know, people, and I deal with this in one of the chapters. People always say, well, how come, they don't make themselves seen? And in fact, it wasn't too long ago that a Israeli official stated that, well, the UFOs and the extraterrestrials are not allowing them to be seen, themselves to be seen, because they're afraid of causing panic. And all I think I can say is bull, because they've been seen all over the planet. You just take recent years, information over the nation's capital of Washington, D.C., pictures of them that were in the newspaper, front page of every newspaper, military jets scrambled and chasing them, getting nowhere, trying to catch them. Then a wave of these craft over the United Kingdom and over London in 54, then over into continental Europe, all over Paris and in Belgium and many of these countries. Then straight in November of 54, information for a period of over 1 week flying over the Vatican with thousands of people watching and taking pictures. Some of those pictures are in the book as well. Then I put in some articles about UFOs cause traffic jam in Madrid. They've been seen in South Africa, Russia, Japan. Basically, I just took a snapshot of the easiest information I could get to put it in there to show you and show people that nobody's hiding from anybody. The only one who's got their heads in the ground are us.
And it's a global phenomenon. That is what is, I think, missing at the moment in the talks that we're having with the Congress and so on. And that is actually what I want to go to next, because whenever people in this field is presented with the subject of UAPs or UFOs, they always seem to forget the historical events of way back. They only talk like, okay, it began in 2007 with the Nimitz, or 2004 with the Nimitz encounter. It didn't. Ufology is a history which goes way back to, let's just admit, at least 1918. First, or 1914.
How about 3,000 years before that?
Yeah.
But the reason is clear, because when I see these articles and they say, these are some of the top 10 best UFO so-called pictures ever taken, and I look at them and I said, well, I can come up with at least another 100 or 200 that were taken from the 30s on, that were clear, viable electromagnetic craft.
Yeah.
But then if they admit that, then people are wanting to go back to see where the oranges come from. And they are in the current situation, administrative wise and academic and what have you, is trying desperately to erase that past, to make it so that you don't know about it and you won't ask questions about it, and you will just simply take for the verbatim answer that you're given, that this is either triangular or tic-tac or cubular or whatever. These are all things that we produce as research and development, but they have nothing to do with extraterrestrial craft. And so that is why the dichotomy and the disconnect, because they want to take that butcher knife and cut through it and remove that which is inconvenient truth for them.
Yeah, that is totally correct, actually. If you just observe the what's going on in the UFO field at the moment. But let's not concentrate too much about the UFO field, because it's still your book, Glenn, we are talking about. So your book also delves into the reasons behind the corruption of UFO history. Can you elaborate some of the reasons behind this? When did it begin to?
Well, I think what happens is you will find that the first chapter of section 2, the first part of it is almost autobiographical of my family and our activities over 50 years. Second part is called Reality Check, and then it goes into 12 chapters from there. And the first chapter is a chronological listing of these type of sightings going back thousands of years, back to Roman and Greek times, East Indian times, the flying scroll, the wheel within the wheel. I mean, there's 400 references in the Bible alone, and so I took, I mean, just bits and pieces, because in reality, if you wanted to do a chronological listing going back for that long, you would have volumes and volumes of just that alone. So I took that which I thought stood out, a few of them that I thought were not given their due praise and due recognition, and included them in there to try to fire up the spark plug, so to speak, in people's thinking. And so I listed those going through, including, for instance, the term flying saucer doesn't come from Kenneth Arnold. It comes from 1878 in the Denison, Texas Daily News, in which a craft was reported by the citizens of the city of Denison, and they called it a flying saucer, and that's how the term first began. And so this is the type of history that continues to be whitewashed, because somebody on the internet decides they're going to say, well, this all term began with Kenneth Arnold, and the next one goes and they're going to do a book about it. So they say, okay, well, this guy said it started with Kenneth Arnold, so we'll use the same reference, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. None of them do any check to see whether this is actually the true thing, a true fact and true statement. They just think, well, that this guy said it, so we can use it. And of course, if anybody calls them on the carpet on it, then they can say, well, it wasn't me who said so, I took it from him over there.
Yeah.
I mean, the irresponsibility in this field is catastrophic.
Yeah.
And so this chronological listing goes through the late 1800s, and my father's first book, Why Are They Here? He's got a section in there from the logbooks of steamships and sailing ships, where they saw these ships come out of the ocean and hover, shoot into space. So some of those are in there. Then you go, and the photographs that were taken in Europe already in the late 1918 of these craft. And while you have a contingent in this field who would love to murk up and mess up the waters of this and say, oh, these were all the Nazis and the Germans and the Nordics and the Aryans and this. Well, the pictures were taken 20 years before the Germans even came into power and began experimenting in what they saw as a copy of the outside hull of the ship in Peenemünde in 1939. And these craft that they developed were very unstable. They did not have electromagnetic propulsion. They traveled a few hundred yards and then crashed, while the other UFOs are recorded at going at 20,000 miles per hour through the atmosphere, coming to a dead stop and maneuvering horizontally and vertically. And we can see that in some film as well that George Adamski took. And even more important like that, up in orbit are sitting carrier crafts or motherships, like we saw in previous pictures, that range in anything from about 1,500 feet long to 20 miles. If the Germans could have built a 20-mile long mothership and saucers that traveled at 20,000 miles per hour, I don't think we would be speaking English right now.
Oh, I think you're quite right about that, Glenn. But let me just sum up and say I think it is worth buying your book. It's available on blurb.com. I will make a link below this video with to the link to both versions of your book, the soft cover and the hardcover. And I think it will be an interesting read for most people who are seriously interested in this subject. So let's say you have the last statement, Glenn, if you want to, just for this subject of your book.
What I tried to do in the book is to provide people with viable answers and not fantasy. Recently, I saw somebody say, well, these ships appear and disappear, so they must be coming through space-time warps or interdimensional rifts and all these other so-called fantasies that we have, and that's what they are, they're fantasies. It is nothing more than a technical process. The craft is able to accelerate from a standstill to tens of thousands of miles per second, and that's much faster than the human eye can pick up the object. I believe that's about 4,000 frames a second your eye can see. And so consequently, it completely disappears because it moves so fast away. It's not any different than looking at the wings of a hummingbird that flap so rapidly that you can't see the wings themselves clearly. You know that they are in motion, but it's so rapid that your eye cannot track it. Or if you want to even make it more simple, stand in front of a propeller airplane and turn that propeller on and let it spin, and you no longer see the blades, you see the whirl of the propeller, and I suggest you don't put your hand in there to test it. Right? And so what happens is these things are scientific capabilities of these crafts, but these people in this field don't have any clue what they're talking about. And so they make it up. And the next one picks it up and makes it up some more. And they continue to make it up because nobody calls them on the carpet on it.
Good ending comments on regarding your book, but Glenn, we will in the next segment, I think we will talk about the state of the UFO field. Thank you very much.